Destination Newry. Conor Murphy, how are you?
Morning, Ron.
It's good to see you. You're most welcome.
Thank you very much.
Good to see you. Conor's with us today because yesterday, so to speak, he was in Stormont hosting the South African Gaels, the Africans who came here to play Gaelic games. Yeah. What was all that about? Why did they come? Who are they? What sort of people are they?
Well, it actually originates as a kind of a global story. It originates in Singapore. This guy, an Englishman called Paul Carpenter.
This sounds like the beginning of a Frederick Forsyth novel, I tell you. Yeah. It all started in Singapore.
During the war.
Please, let me, keep it going.
Well, the English guy went out to Singapore where he had no history or no involvement with Gaelic games, but he met up with the Irish expats out there who were organising themselves and starting to play some Gaelic games. We got quite taken by it. He then moved on to South Africa. One of the people he actually met in Singapore was a Camnock man. Micheál Smith, son of Mickey Smith, or butcher, or local butcher.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah.
Met his son out there, and they went their separate ways. Eventually, Micheál went to the States, and Paul Carpenter ended up in South Africa, working in the townships. He met a girl from Tyrone, from the Errigal Kieran Club, which is in Ballygawley's Peter Canavan's club. And between them, they started up Gaelic football with the kids from the townships who had no experience of Gaelic sports, and he would do a thing where if they took them to a tournament, generally playing against better off kids, he bought a whole series of boot bags, the small bags for carrying. And he just bought empty bags, only £1 a piece, and he would leave them with the other teams, and they would fill them with their unwanted boots. And he brought them back to the townships then and started more and more kids playing Gaelic football.
It's a gorgeous story.
He organised then this trip to Ireland. They were going over to Dubai, I think. There's an Asian Gaelic Games tournament. And they found that it was as cheap to come by Ireland and go to Dubai as to fly directly to Dubai. So he fundraised, and he brought them to Ireland to go to GAA headquarters to play teams in Dublin and in Belfast. And then as part of that, they also wanted to look at the role of sport in community building and cross-community relations, because there's still ongoing in South Africa at the end of the legacy of the conflict there. And so he contacted his friend Micheál Smith then in America and said, could you get someone to arrange us to visit Stormont?
Wow.
To see. So Micheál emailed me and we set up the contacts and we arranged the visit, and they arrived up at Stormont.
These are township children growing up.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So they have a background of great poverty.
Absolutely, but they're an incredibly lively bunch and happy.
Well, they are
bunch.
that anyway, aren't they? In that environment.
I went out to meet them walking up towards Stormont. I knew they'd arrived, and I was in with Martin McGuinness in his office, and I said, listen, I'll go out and meet them and bring them in.
Yeah.
And they come up the hill towards Stormont singing, chanting, and it just caught all the security people by surprise, and everybody was completely bowled over. They created such a happy atmosphere around themselves.
Well, they do. That's Africa for you. That's Africa for you. So what were you able, what was their, in conversing with them, what did you detect to be their expectation of Stormont and the visit to Northern Ireland? Well, and what were they able to take in reality?
They mixed the trip to the north side of the border. They obviously mixed with Gaelic football, played a team from St Mary's, did a coaching session.
Did they win that game?
They were winning at half time. Apparently they've great athleticism, great speed. They can move the ball very quick from hand to hand, but their kicking isn't. And they were winning by 6 or 7 points at half time, but the coach, Paul Carpenter, had said to the opposition, listen, don't go easy on these guys. They need to be, they're training for a tournament in Dubai. That's what they're heading on to. He says, so give them a tough game. So I think they lost out at the end, but I'm told that they beat St Vincent's old boys.
Oh, the old boys.
So they're very much learning the sport, but they're very athletic. But they mixed that when they came to Belfast with playing some games, getting a coaching from some very experienced coaches at the Ulster Council of the GAA provided for them, and also then visiting the Falls Road, the murals, doing a little bit of the history of the conflict resolution, the use of sport to break down barriers between communities, and that was the context of their visit up to Stormont. They met with Martin McGuinness, they met with Carl Nicullen, the sports minister. They presented Martin with one of their jerseys. O'Neill's were in hand, actually. O'Neill's had developed a kit for them. And they presented, you can see that
it's in the paper today, absolutely.
So they had presented them with a kit. So they were very taken by it, and I actually, when I went home afterwards, Micheál Smith emailed me from America. He'd been in touch with them to say they very much enjoyed it, and it was a great experience for them.
I suppose I really want to ask the question, and I really want the answer to be what the answer won't be. And the question is, did the unionists take any interest in them?
No, well,
you see, that's the answer.
In fairness, they just asked to come up and meet with Martin McGuinness.
Yeah.
And we hadn't invited anyone else, and it was because it was a kind of a whistle-stop tour.
Yeah.
Now, I'm sure some of the unionists, had they been invited, there are some up there who are interested, who are at least open to the idea of Gaelic games and other cultures, and there are unionists who have been to Gaelic football matches. So I think had we had time to arrange the trip properly,
it would have been a wider thing.
We probably could have got a
so
wider audience.
that's half a good answer.
Well, I
half
think,
the answer I wanted.
Yeah, well, I think there's progress been made in all fronts.
Yeah.
In that. Sometimes it's very low key. People don't see it. You know, people from the Republican side have been to Windsor Park to matches occasionally. I've certainly been to Ravenhill. I was invited to Ravenhill. I yet to be able to take up the offer. I'd love to go and see Ulster.
Of course you would.
And similarly, people from the unionist background have been over at Gaelic events. And the First Minister turned up at the Michaela match in Casement Park. So I think those small gestures are very important, and quite often they go unnoticed. But
you're building. This is about building the peace.
Absolutely.
And you mentioned the role of sport, and that their awareness of the role of sport in building, in conflict resolution.
Yeah.
How would you put flesh on the bones of that notion, that concept?
Well, I think part of the attraction for the GAA, for these people who have no history of Gaelic games or Irish sport or culture, is the nature of the GAA itself, in that it is very community orientated. It is about building up communities. It's about grassroots organisations.
I listen to Fergal McCormick shout about St. Peter's all the time on this vein.
Absolutely. But it also doesn't have sometimes the kind of cynicism that there is at the high level of professional paid sports. And so I think for young kids who are in areas that are in great need, it offers something which is a little bit purer, a little bit more community orientated, a little bit about building up community, about giving back to communities. And that's the whole ethos of GAA. I'm not saying other sports at grassroots level do exactly the same thing, soccer, rugby, boxing, but the Gaelic has that right through to the top of the organisation. It's all about volunteerism. It's about an ethos of giving back. And I think that attracts outsiders who look at it and say, this sport in Ireland that can attract 20 or 80,000 people to its finals, it's an amateur sport. These guys train like professionals. It's all for the pride of the jersey, love of the parish, love of the country. And so I think that attracts them to it. And then they also, I think, through the Ulster Council and the work that the Ulster Council have been doing in the north here, can see how an organisation has set itself a target of breaking down barriers through engagement, through sport.
How are we, I'll broaden it a wee bit if I may, how are we on the breaking down of barriers? Just Nelson McCausland today pinning his colours to the mast of those who break the law in relation to parades and all of that. And my advice to him on programme this morning was, say little and say it well, because it doesn't help really when people are breaking the law in relation to parades and they're getting some kind of ministerial support. This man has yet to climb on the train on the road yet, or am I wrong? Am I harsh with?
Well, I certainly think there. I suppose it's like all human organisations. There are a mixture of people who are worthy, people who have offer some hope, and people who don't really. There are people, I think, who are well intentioned within the DUP who do see the bigger picture and the need to break down barriers and to build a better community. There are others who think, perhaps for electoral reasons, North Belfast is a very contested area. People feel obliged to row in behind the lowest common denominator. We would say clearly that isn't providing leadership. What people in the community want is leadership which is taking people in a positive direction. And we find that on the Republican side, if people are messing about and creating problems, that we're obliged to call that and say it.
You've done that, I've seen that. And I'm not a Sinn Féin person, but I see that.
Yeah, well,
you've done that, it's to your credit.
I mean, if you do set your face in a course of action which is about building a better community, about building peace, then you have to confront those who are trying to hold that back. And some elements within unionism, and sadly some within quite senior positions in unionism, don't do that, and they tend to pander to the worst elements rather than actually confront them.
I have my former Good Morning Ulster presenter with me next week, Mike Nesbitt, on the programme. Give me one central question you think I should ask him.
Well, I think he should be asked in what direction that they intend to unionism. Sorry, where is it going? How do they intend to build relations with the rest of us? How does he intend to accommodate a sense of Irishness? Because, I mean, on the one hand, you do get people like himself and Peter Robinson talking about reaching out to the nationalist community, about people being comfortable within the United Kingdom and supporting that idea. But on the other hand, they pander to the lowest common denominator, the most sectarian base element within unionism, the flag wavers, the people who march, the Twaddell Avenue people. So there is a contradiction there, and you know, Mike Nesbitt has withdrawn from the Haas process. What little life there's left at the attempts to try and keep that ember glowing a little bit, and he has withdrawn from that. And you know, I think the question, I suppose, is, do they put party interests ahead of peace building? You know, and quite often party interests suffer because of peace building. You know, you lose people. People walk away from you.
I would suggest to you that a prime example of that is the SDLP putting peace building ahead of party interests when they encouraged the Republican side of things to come in out of the cold and lost out as a consequence of that. They were a sacrificial anode in many ways.
Well, I mean, politics is more complex than that, and the SDLP as a unit now claim that, although it was quite clearly John Hume without very little support from the rest of his party colleagues. And I mean, we have acknowledged that very often, that John Hume's role in peace building in relation to that. There are many reasons why a party loses support, some of it to do with their own performance and their own organisation. But nonetheless, I think peace building does require occasionally, it requires obviously courage, it requires leadership, it requires people to challenge themselves. And you know, if you march behind the beating drum, well, you aren't challenging anyone in your own community. You're certainly not challenging yourself.
Kyle Paisley from his eyrie over in England said a way around the flags thing is, on the days the flag's not been flown at the City Hall in Belfast, the flag of St. Patrick should be flown. What do you think of that?
Well, you know, to be quite honest, I think sometimes our civic buildings are better without flags. You know, I think. I mean, I appreciate that we are in a difficult bind because we have competing national identities in this part of Ireland. We have always argued for either no flags or both flags.
Both flags. Would you, in the Haas thing, were you suggesting that to the right of the of the facade of the City Hall there would be the Union flag, to the left would be the Irish flag? Well, would that have been a suggestion as a way forward?
Well, we've always suggested either neutrality or no flags whatsoever. You know, I mean, how public buildings accommodate that? City Hall's under the control of City Council, so it's a matter for themselves. But to be quite honest, you know, the accepting of designated days, these 17 days that they're flown, it was a compromise on our behalf.
You were willing to go with that?
Well, we did in the City Hall. We were willing to go with that. You know, others, I think, where they have accepted in Stormont and in all of the government department buildings, I mean, all of the, not all of them, but any of them that have flagpoles basically fly the flag on designated days. You know, so parties at Stormont level had accepted that, but yet at City Hall they wanted to create an enormous issue around it. And I think it was again to do with electoralism, again to do with an East Belfast contest, and which then let a genie out of the bottle, which they struggle now to put back in again.
And their leadership from the bottom up, from the lowest common denominator.
Yeah, well, I think when you do that, when you bring people onto the streets, you often surrender that territory to them. You allow them to lead. You allow them to dictate. When the unionist parties then, having, according to themselves, their own pronouncements, got so close to signing up to Haas to buckle at the last moment, almost give some sense of empowerment to the people who were trying to bring that process down. They thought they were responsible for holding unionist leadership back from, I think all they're doing really is encouraging and empowering people who have a very negative contribution to make.
Do you sense at all that we have, to some measure, lost Obama as a consequence of not agreeing Haas?
I think certainly there is a strong sense that we get from the White House that there's a degree of frustration. I mean, Joe Biden was very closely involved in liaison with Haas. He's there, himself and Haas are quite close, so he would been getting a very strong feedback. He was in telephone contact with leaders towards the end of that process, and I do think, I mean, Obama met the leaders when they were out there. There was a question mark right up until St.
That's right. Yes. Would it be a snub or not a snub?
And I think there certainly is a bit of a cold blast blowing from the White House and Capitol Hill in our direction. And I think people should, you know, I mean, we're not trying to make peace here to keep Americans happy, but by the same token, they have been very important in our peace process in terms of offering support and ensuring things happened. So I think it would be foolish to snub that or to reject that hand of friendship. And also, I think, I mean, I travel quite a lot in conflict legacy work across the world to different areas. You know, we're invited as people who are perceived as having had a successful conflict transformation process, and people draw an awful lot of hope from what has happened here. Because we're here in the middle of it, sometimes we become cynical about the problems that we face and how far we've moved. But when you go internationally and you talk to people in Palestine, the Kurdish people, you know, in Sri Lanka, anywhere we've been in the Basque Country, people see an enormous hope and an enormous sense of possibility here. So I think we have a responsibility internationally, given the support that was given to us, to make a success of our peace process and to help export that optimism in other parts of the world.
It doesn't help that optimism when you've hit the buffers on something as possibly as simple as past flags and the flags and parades.
Well, you do, but in some ways that they're like the fronting up of what are essentially core issues, and that is community identity. You know, the legacy of the past.
But you were able to compromise on that area, community identity. The flying of the flags, that's a major compromise for Sinn Féin.
Yeah, it is, but I think there's probably on the national side of the community there is more of a confidence that things are changing. When you're trying to hold on to a past and to try and impede progress and to stop change happening, that's a much more difficult position. And I think we come to it with a greater sense of confidence that we're moving history's moving in the right direction.
Sorry, go ahead.
Well, so it's not that it's easier for us, but I think sometimes our own people are a little bit more relaxed about making a compromise because they can see the general trend and thrust of where things are going. For unionism, that sometimes can be more difficult, and I think that's why there is a responsibility in us to try and engage with unionism and to help people over certain hurdles that they meet. So in some ways they look like superficial issues, but they do go to identity, about sharing space, about sharing the future, about equality, and these are all the core touchstones, if you like, of the Good Friday Agreement.
Where's Haas now?
He's probably sitting in the States observing things with a degree of...
Where are we going with it?
Well, I would like to think that party leaders will get down to looking at that.
Mike has walked.
Mike has walked, but I think you're 6 or 7 weeks out from an election now, so you are in kind of that silly season stuff where people will take positions which not necessarily they'll assume the other side. Our difficulty, I suppose, is that we move from this election into a Westminster election next year. We move into an Assembly election the following year. So there are limited periods. So I would, for people to do business, and I would hope that, you know, very quickly on the other side of the election, people make another serious attempt to reach an agreement on implementing the Haas proposals.
You're there for the long haul, Conor Murphy.
Well, we all have been here a long time, and I intend to stay until we see the thing through. So, yeah, we're patient. As I say, we probably have more of a sense of the tide of history moving in a certain direction, so that allows us to be patient. But we also want to build a better community. I know the sort of community we grew up in, the sort of experience we grew up in. There's a determination not to allow that to happen again, and a sense of a better future for all of us, not just Republicans, but for everybody that lives in this island.
Well done.
Thank you, Rowan.
Go well. Take care. All the best.